ma'am, I would just like to take this opportunity to introduce Human Biological Institute in this break.
Yes, please, please, sir.
Yeah.
Please, sir.
Thank you so much. With your permission. Yeah. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce Human Biological Institute, a division of Indian Immunologicals Limited, which is organizing this webinar. I sincerely thank Dr. Alpesh Gandhi and Dr. Jaideep Tank, and absolutely Dr. Shada Jain and the team, and Dr. Queen Aditya for being associated with this webinar. And already we have started the webinar in a full-fledged, and it's the first session has been excellent. With this, I would like to start introducing Human Biological Institute. Human Biological Institute is a division of Indian Immunologicals Limited, which was established in the year 1982. Indian Immunologicals Limited is a subsidiary of National Dairy Development Board, that is NDDB. HBI was established in the year 1998 when the Government of India requested Indian Immunologicals Limited to produce a modern tissue culture anti-rabies vaccine to phase out the unsafe nerve tissue vaccine. This was the year when actually we used to take 14 injections in the naval area. Now we have phased it out as a modern tissue culture rabies vaccine. The first manufacturing facility of HPA was established at Ooty. The facility was the second of its kind, or the first of its kind, to roll out the first purified varicella rabies vaccine of India, and the second in the world. Subsequently, HBI launched other vaccines, and currently we are the major player in human vaccine segment. Today, we are the leader in anti-rabies vaccine and present in more than 50 countries. We have 3 state-of-the-art manufacturing facility at Ooty, Gachibowli, and Karkapatla and Genome Valley. With the COVID outbreak, all of you might be knowing Indian Immunologicals Limited has got also a big role in coming up with a vaccine, which is a COVID-19 vaccine, which we'll discuss on the later page. Our mission is shaping global healthcare by spearheading One Health initiative. Our mission to innovate, produce, and market high-quality healthcare products and services to improve and extend lives. We believe in improving affordable products with high quality through continuous technical innovations and improvements to meet our customer needs. As we discussed, we have a COVID-19 vaccine, which is in the pipeline, which is a live attenuated vaccine, which is going to be coming in one year from now. It is going to be very affordable technology. Then we are coming with hepatitis A, measles rubella vaccine, chikungunya vaccine, rabies therapeutic monoclonal antibodies, typhoid conjugate vaccine, dengue vaccine, Zika vaccine, varicella vaccine, and pneumococcal conjugate vaccine. So all the vaccines are coming out from Hyderabad, which is having having expert scientists exclusively working in the R&D unit of Human Biological Institute. Yes, this is the India's largest anti-rabies vaccine. Every minute, we are proud to say that we are saving millions of lives every year, and every minute 40 vaccinations happens with Avera across the globe. So with the expertise of vaccines, we entered into the puberty to menopause segment. It's our vision to make puberty to menopause affordable and accessible with high quality products. So HBI has also ventured into other areas of disease prevention like probiotics, nutraceuticals, and hormones for infertility. That's producing and marketing products is not our job, but Indian Immunologicals Limited has been known for its corporate social responsibility, and IL has contributed to the tune of 3.33 crores for the fight against Corona, 2.33 crores to Prime Minister Case Fund, and 1 crore to CM Relief Fund of Telangana. Apart from that, we have adopted government schools, and around 2 schools have been adopted in Hyderabad, wherein the infrastructure has been completely at par with any private school, and the strength of the government school has increased. So that is the impact we bring in the education through our corporate social responsibility projects. And we're proud to say that 1,600 school children from Telangana and Tamil Nadu are benefited with a gift milk every day. We provide milk to the girl child in these areas. So this is our details, www.indibin.com, and follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and all social media platforms. Thank you for being here with us today. I now leave it to Dr. Sada Jain.
Thank you, Dr. Santosh. I think,
Thank you, ma'am.
during these COVID times, one thing has become very clear, that the vaccines are very important.
Very important, yeah.
This vaccine-related diseases, now there has been a little turmoil. There has been a global drop in the vaccines, and the WHO warns again that, any time the outbreak should be there, and the government should definitely know that it should not be, the services should be continued. And your contribution, your organization contributes as a person, as an Indian person, and on the behalf of the rest of the people, I definitely bow down that India ko Atmanirbhar to banna hi padega. And people like you will definitely pave that way, that tomorrow with proud we can say that we are Indians. I always say that they're proud, but many people shy away. But I think with times, we will not be able to say that, we will feel proud to be an Indian. So I think with these words to you and your organization, we come to a very second topic.
Yeah, thank you so much.
The second topic is very dear to me. This is called premenstrual dysphoria, and very commonly, everybody knows premenstrual tension. When the lady half of the house gets irritable, the gentleman remarks, "Aapki mama ko premenstrual tension ho raha hai." So this is a common remark made at home front. Yes, it's a common disease. It is a cyclical recurrence of a physical, psychological, behavioral symptoms which only come after ovulation. And they disappear with the periods. Still, I find it troubles so much the woman, because a relationship are gone. She finds the day-to-day functioning becomes difficult. And to do justice to this particular topic, we have a young gynecologist, my colleague, now very recently shifted to Calcutta, Dr. Queen Aditya. Can we have a slide? Very bright gynecologist. And I have a pleasure of monitoring her for almost 15 years before she shifted to Delhi. Great orator, very hard worker, and not only that, in a very short time, she has made a mark for herself in West Bengal Obstetric and Gynecology Society, and she has made a place for herself in Foxy. She has been a recipient of Abdul Kalam APJ Appreciation Award, and I see a great future in her if she very sincerely offers her services to Foxy and to her Bengal society. Like me, she also has one child, that's the girl child. She is committed to the cause of the girl child. With these words, I will ask Dr. Queen Aditya to take the platform. Dr. Queen Aditya.
Madam, unmute yourself.
Queen, we come.
Unmute yourself, madam.
Yes, now I got overwhelmed listening to ma'am that I forgot that I had to unmute myself, and it was going, whenever I'm trying, it's just going away. So anyways, first of all, ma'am pranam, Sharda ma'am pranam. I'm really overwhelmed to be on the same platform with you. We have been listening to you. I was in Delhi for 15 years and I've been listening to you throughout, and I was so privileged to be a part of your team, East Delhi Gynecologist Forum, along with Jyoti ma'am. I really look up to both Sharda ma'am and Jyoti ma'am, and I was like way junior to both of you, and I always used to look up to you. Now on the same platform with you is giving me immense pleasure. I have no words to describe how overwhelmed I am. That is number one. And I want to thank Foxy, Alpesh sir and Joydeep sir for giving us this opportunity to be talking in front of all our gynecologist colleagues and seniors across India. And I thank the organizers, also Santosh and his entire team, for giving us this platform once again, and also Shashwat and Dr. Sharma for also giving us this opportunity. Once again, I want to convey my pranam to Sharda ma'am and Jyoti ma'am, and let us start talking about this very important topic which ma'am said, that yes, it is very dear to her and to all of us, because we've all faced it, though not in a very severe way, in some form or the other. All of us have faced it sometime or the other, and we are concerned about the women who are suffering from it big time. Like, to a little extent, all of us have suffered, but those who are really suffering because of it, and we need to look into the issue, and instead of just telling them that, oh, you're acting or something, because there are families where they do not treat the woman very well when they complain of these symptoms. So we actually have to help them, people who are in need, and that is why we are going to talk about the management of PMS. Why is Santosh, why is this way? Let me see, that's not coming.
Yeah, what's ma'am? What's your...
So I was trying to, yes, now it's from the normal arrow, it was not going. Okay, now I've got it. Okay.
Click.
So PMS, or premenstrual syndrome, as we all know, talking about it, a few general facts about it is that PMS is a common cause of physical, psychological, and social problems in women of reproductive age group. It is distinguished from the normal premenstrual symptoms by the degree of distress. That, as I just mentioned, all of us have suffered from it to some extent or the other, but it is called PMS only when the degree goes higher, so that it causes enough distress and disruption of the system, of the woman's physical, psychological well-being. So the symptoms occur during the period leading up to the menstrual period, and are relieved by the onset of the menstruation. So it is after ovulation, as ma'am mentioned, and anytime after ovulation, usually the last 5 to 7 days of that cycle, but some can get it right immediately after ovulation, right up to the onset of menstruation, which usually relieves the symptoms. The common symptoms include irritability, depression, anxiety, lethargy, which we all know. A clinical diagnosis of PMS requires that the symptoms are confirmed by prospective recording. When a patient comes to us and says, I've had these symptoms, and we have the propensity or the tendency to immediately stamp her as a PMS. But how severe the symptoms are, whether they're actually disrupting her life or not, we can only tell after a prospective 2-month study is being done on that woman, so that it is recorded by the woman as it occurs. So the day she comes to us, we more or less think of the fact that she is suffering from PMS, but we cannot actually stamp her as one. We have to be sympathetic to her, that is for sure, but before stamping her, we have to give her that diary, so that she keeps a record of what is happening to her over the next 2 months. And after 2 months, when she comes back to us with that diary, then we can, after reading the whole thing and knowing what exactly the score is, we can actually stamp her as a case as severe as PMS, and not only the symptoms. So she is suffering from the premenstrual tension or the syndrome as such. It is estimated that approximately 1 in 5 women of the reproductive age group are adversely affected. As I mentioned, 80-85% of us are affected sometime or the other, sometimes recurrently, but adversely affected will be around 1 in 5. PMS can severely disrupt a woman's daily life, and some women rightly seek medical treatment and attention. So what it is actually, it's one of the most common disorders of women of the fertile age, that is the reproductive age group. It is a collection of physical and psychological symptoms that occur to a woman weeks before her period. It might be 1 week or even maybe 2 weeks before her period, as Sharda ma'am already has explained, that after ovulation. Around 85% of women in their reproductive age experience some form of it sometime or the other, which I had already mentioned. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or something called PMDD, is a more severe form of this, having greater psychological symptoms. Fortunately, not too many women suffer from it, but it is not unheard of. It's not unknown. When the symptomatology gets that worse, then we really have to be very sympathetic with the woman and actually treat her symptoms. Otherwise, it can take a very bad shape. So PMS encompasses a vast array of psychological symptoms: depression, anxiety, irritability, lack of confidence, mood swings. The physical symptoms can be bloatedness, mastalgia, joint and muscle pain, fatigue, acne, and so on. A severe form, as we already mentioned, was that PMDD, which is fortunately not that not common. It is very severe, but it is usually not that common. And as we all know, these are conditions of the luteal phase, that is the second half after ovulation. Now the symptoms, if we chart them down, the physiological ones will be bloating, weight gain or fluid retention, breast tenderness, menstrual cramps, pelvic discomfort and pain, sugar craving. And the psychological, which are even more profound, are irritability, depression, anxiety, mood swings, mental confusion, fatigue, aggression, lethargy. There can be different types. There are different ways of talking about it. A very easy way is to talk about it like PMS-A, that is where the anxiety, irritability is the major problem. PMS-C, where the craving for sweets, increased appetite, fatigue, that is the major problem. The D type, where the depression, crying and the psychological problems are more. And a PMS-H, that is when she bloats up, like the bloating, weight gain, fluid retention, breast tenderness. These are all because of fluid gain, and that these are the different ways that it may be classified. Though there is not a clear-cut demarcation, but these are the ways that it can be done. Now coming to the other way, the core premenstrual disorders are the most commonly encountered and widely recognized ones, but there can be other types also, apart from the usual one that we know that it's just post-ovulation in a normal ovulatory cycle. There can be other forms also, that is premenstrual exacerbation of an underlying disorder, such as diabetes, depression, migraine and all that. Sometimes non-ovulatory women somehow also suffer a problem in the though they are actually not having a ovulation. In spite of non-ovulatory cycles, they might be having symptoms that are akin to PMS. There can be something called a progestogen-induced PMS, where the exogenous progesterones that are given either in a COC or in an HRT to combat the hyperestrogenic effects, those can also cause PMS. And also, we know of women who have undergone hysterectomy or endometrial ablation and those kind of things, where they are not actually having a cyclical bleed, in spite of not having a cyclical menstruation, but their ovaries are intact, and thereby the same changes can happen. Why I'm saying this is that there might be families where some of the family members may say that you're not even having a menstruation, why are you complaining so much? But when they have an intact ovary and the ovarian function is going on, they can still complain of symptoms of PMS, though they are not having a cyclical bleed. And so the family members of such women also have to be very sympathetic and caring towards them. So the common causes, this is actually an enigma. No one can actually say why a PMS happens. This is something that we are all baffled about, but still the very few causes that we can think about are an imbalance in estrogen progesterone. Now, the same estrogen progesterone level that is present in another woman and not causing PMS might be present in a particular woman and cause her PMS. So like we say that in endometriosis, we talk about retrograde menstruation. Probably so many women are having retrograde menstruation, but not everyone suffers from endometriosis. Similarly, with the miniature like alteration in the estrogen progesterone balance, a slight imbalance in so many women might not cause, but in women who are destined to suffer from PMS might suffer from the symptomatology. Similarly, hyperprolactinemia is also correlated. There can be an aldosterone excess, vitamin B6, magnesium, and all of the deficiency of these kind of things, even calcium deficiency of the micro and macronutrients can be involved, and there can be an imbalance of the various prostaglandins. So when we're talking about the PMS, coming to the irritability, mood swings and all of that at the CNS level, the serotogenic activity in the brain is influenced by the ovarian hormones. Serotonin receptors are sensitive to estrogen and progesterone makes an individual prone to depression by increasing MAO, which is associated with the transport of serotonin. And while estrogen creates an antidepressant effect, therefore we see that low estrogen levels in luteal phase and high progesterone levels in the same luteal phase can trigger this depressive mood, and women who are more prone to it with these changes are going to suffer from the consequences. Similarly, when we are talking about the etiology, allopregnanolone, which appears to be the metabolite of progesterone, regulates the levels of GABA in the blood, and GABA receptors are less susceptible to this allopregnanolone since they are exposed to higher concentrations prior to the luteal phase. But in the luteal phase, when the level goes down, again, that can be a trigger for the woman to suffer from PMS. Associations of PMS, as we see, PMS is more likely to develop in women whose mothers have also suffered from severe PMS. And mostly PMS is found in the late 20s, and 30s and 40s are less susceptible to PMS. Probably the later part, just the premenopausal years can also be bad, and the early reproductive phase, that is 20s, mostly the later 20s, suffer more from the symptomatology. PMS is more frequent in monozygotic twins, it's been found, than in dizygotic twins, suggesting that PMS might be having a genetic component. And BMI, exercise, and diet are also thought to have a role in the etiology of PMS. Now, investigations that we do for most of the situations in PMS, actually the most important thing is that prospective diary, which I spoke about earlier. But whatever investigations we do, if at all, are to rule out other situations. Things that can be, we can think of, suppose someone is complaining of lethargy. So getting a CBC done to rule out anemia, a TSH done to rule out any kind of hypothyroidism, those kind of things we might do, but otherwise there is no investigation per se that we do only for PMS. And as we can understand, this is normal and logical that in case of severe psychological complaints, then it is better that we take a psychiatrist's opinion as well. So, now coming to the diagnosis, as I mentioned, when assessing women with PMS, symptoms should be recorded prospectively over 2 cycles using a symptom diary, as retrospective recall of symptoms is unreliable. She talks about her last 2-3 months, that day I had this, those days, but exactly what had all had happened, it is not possible for anyone to remember, no matter how high an IQ that woman might be having. So what is absolutely is necessary is a prospective diary for the next 2 cycles. And the daily record of severity of the problems, this is done like it's given a score of 1 to 6. All of the different problems that are put up out here, 11 of them are put up, and for every day of the month. And then when all of that is counted together, the score, like from 1 to 6 on all of the days on the various different accounts, that is 11 accounts there are. And then when the cumulative score of all of that together for 2 months, if it's on the first day of cycle around 50 or so. And then what happens is that then 5 days prior to that, suppose 5 days before the cycle, that is the day 23 or 24 of the previous cycle, when she's having the PMS symptoms, it should be at least, there should be a 30% difference between the premenstrual and the postmenstrual, at least a 30% difference of the score. And on the day 1, if it's around 50, then the 5 days before that, it will roughly be around 70. So these, if it's just like on the 5 days before it is 52, and on the first day of cycle it is 50, then there is no significance. That means it is not a case of PMS. So that is how a cumulative total score over 2 months is put up, and from there only we actually can stamp a woman as being suffering from PMS. It is important that a patient with PMS symptoms requires a holistic approach. It is actually necessary that we look it up along with our colleagues who can, like as I mentioned, there might be the requirement of a psychologist, there might be the requirement of a physician, maybe a dietitian, probably a psychiatrist. So we have to look at it and also with a very sympathetic angle. So general advice about exercise, diet, and stress, these things are actually the first line of management, which I will be talking about. And as I earlier also mentioned, if required, if we really think that there is a profound psychological component, then the advice of a psychiatrist is definitely required. And without the symptom diary, we are actually nowhere. There is this charting actually, Abhay and Kaplan's premenstrual syndrome management. They have 4 categories of how to manage. The first 4 steps. The first step is basically lifestyle modification and lifestyle modification alone. And a good number of women are going to benefit only from this first step. Then when that is not working good enough, when the woman is still symptomatic and when still her lifestyle or her daily routine is very disrupted, she is still very upset and having all the symptoms, then we have to go to the second step, which can comprise of the various nutraceuticals or adding stuffs along with the diet, adding other nutraceuticals or other vitamins and all of that, antioxidants, and also comes the CBT or the cognitive behavioral therapy. These come in the second line. When these are also not working, then we go to the third line, which is proper pharmacological intervention. And amongst the non-hormonal can be the SSRIs, because I already mentioned that there is a role of serotonin and GABA. So in that regard, SSRIs also play a very important role, but we try not to go up to that. We try with lifestyle modifications and then we try with the nutraceuticals, because SSRIs can have their adverse effects and we really do not want the patient to suffer from the same. But when the patient is not responding, then we do not have a choice. Then we are going to SSRIs. Apart from SSRIs, there can be hormonal modes of treatment, and some people try diuretics and NSAIDs as well. But when even this is not working, as the last resort, surgical treatment can be thought of, which is very logically oophorectomy, removing the ovary, because it is said that it is because of the ovarian cycle, because of the estrogen progesterone imbalance, that all of this is happening. So theoretically, oophorectomy or a TLH or TAH along with BSO can do the trick, but that is something that none of us actually want to go to. That is I won't say the last resort, it is the ultimate last resort, which none of us want. So now if we have a look at the flow, again the same thing. The first line will be exercise and lifestyle changes. The second line will be cognitive behavior therapy, nutraceuticals. Third line will be SSRIs, as I mentioned, also NSAIDs and diuretics, and the hormonal treatments. And the fourth line is surgery, which none of us actually want to go to. We will try everything we can to prevent that. Now, coming to the management, the first line, as I mentioned, was that it is a multidisciplinary team approach, but individualized management plan is also required, because the number, type, and severity of premenstrual symptoms vary from person to person. In the mild to moderate categories, lifestyle changes and diet changes cure the main symptomatology. But if the symptoms start to have an adverse impact on the daily life, then pharmacological treatment may have to be introduced. The first step in PMS management is to create awareness with education and consultancy to teach women self-screening and lifestyle modification. These are followed. Self-screening is that DRSP that I had already mentioned. These are followed by non-pharmacological and pharmacological strategies and surgical methods as the last resort, as I already mentioned. Now, coming to lifestyle modification, because stress increases the severity of PMS, coping with stress significantly simplifies PMS management. In this context, the recommended methods of coping with stress will be the breathing exercises, relaxation exercises such as meditation and yoga, having a bath, a hot shower probably, sleeping well enough. Sleep is something that evades us nowadays, but we need proper sleep, especially a woman who is suffering from the disastrous effects of PMS. Dealing with a hobby, a massage, biofeedback, auto-hypnosis, acupressure is something I don't know, but these are things that have been advocated. And a very important factor is quitting smoking. Those of the women who are smoking might as well give it a shot. And this, if never, then at least now quit smoking. Coming to the dietary advice, which is also a very important part of the lifestyle modification. And this will include 6 small meals rather than 3 main meals per day, less fat, sugar, alcohol consumption, more fiber, vegetables, fruit consumption, reduce irritability, insomnia. We should give up caffeine, that is tea, coffee, colas, and to also reduce edema, and thereby salt consumption should also be cut short. And the natural diuretics in some food like grapefruit and all should be considered. And also the consumption of whole grain bread, barley, brown rice. As we know, the complex carbohydrates will definitely give a better effect than the simple carbohydrates, as we know otherwise also, which always are good for our system. Then iron-rich food should be consumed with sources of vitamin C also to replace iron lost in the menstruation. And it has been found that non-heme iron plays a better role as far as PMS is concerned. I'll talk about that later. And walnuts and flax seeds, which are a rich source of omega-3 fatty acids and also fatty fishes, should also be added to the diet, obviously only in a non-vegetarian, but walnuts and flax seeds can be taken by anyone. Consuming calcium-rich foods, whatever other things we do, and the milk products, some green leafy vegetables also can help. And when snacking is the habit of today, all children, adults, everyone is snacking all the time. So if we have to do so, might as well look for the healthier snacks like the whole grain cereals, dried fruits, nuts, instead of the burgers and pizzas that we regularly go for. So points to consider while we integrate the complementary therapies with specific nutrients, because as I mentioned, after the first line, the second line, we're going into the nutraceuticals and CBT. So coming to the nutraceuticals, data from clinical studies are limited and underpowered, and interactions with conventional medicines should be considered also. And these are the various studies that have taken place with the various nutraceuticals, amongst which I can say that isoflavones have not given very good results. St. John's wort, which is heavily spoken about, it has also given mixed results. But ginkgo biloba has shown some benefit. Evening primrose oil, which a lot of us are using, has also given some benefit. And we all know that magnesium, though it's saying mixed results, there are a few studies which have said good things about the use of magnesium, calcium, vitamin D, and iron also I mentioned. And vitamin B6, though they are saying out here it's mixed results, but many studies have given us good reviews about using vitamin B6. So these are, the various studies that took place about the nutraceuticals. Coming to evening primrose oil, it is very high in linoleic acid and GLA, that is gamma linolenic acid. It also contains other fatty acids like oleic acid, palmitic acid, stearic acids, and so on. EPO has regularly been used in the treatment of PMS. As I mentioned, many of us are using EPO since many years. Now, whether there's any logic, as far as I understand, there is a bit of logic that GLA present in EPO might help us. This is because prostaglandin are there, two types, the anti-inflammatory PG1 and the pro-inflammatory PG2 series. And the anti-inflammatory PG1 is derived from linolenic acid, which is converted to GLA, that is gamma linolenic acid. And this anti-inflammatory PG1 is lesser in women who are found to suffer from PMS, and the pro-inflammatory PG2 series are more. And therefore, it has been found that the imbalance in the PG series could produce inflammation in and causing PMS. Thereby, oh my God, where is this gone? 1 second, I can't find it. Yeah. And so a few studies about EPO. This particular study by Khu and Batisutta did not show us very good effects. They had used it up till 3 months in women and did not find a beneficial effect. But then in the next study by Mahaboobi, it was found that only when it is used for around 6 months or so, the beneficial effects are there. And because in the previous study, it was used only till 3 months, they did not get any beneficial effect. In this case, it was 4 to 6 months or longer, they had found beneficial effects as far as the symptomatology of PMS is concerned. So this is a factor that we have to keep in mind. If we are using it, we have to keep our patients, we have to tell our patient to be patient about it. And if they demand beneficial effects overnight, they will be very upset. So they have to be counseled that it will take some time. It will gradually set in, but usually after 6 months, they will get beneficial effects. Now, this other study spoke about, this is an Italian study by Facchinetti, and this supported the use of ginkgo biloba. And whereas a lot of studies were there about St. John's wort and all that, they did not find any beneficial effect, but they spoke highly in favor of ginkgo biloba. Now, vitamin B6, we all know, here there were 9 published trials, including 1,000 women, and they were found that vitamin B6 is effective compared to placebo as far as symptomatology of PMS is concerned. Now, also, another study showed that higher intakes in the diet of the vitamin B1 and B2 also showed beneficial results as far as the symptomatology of PMS is concerned. So out here, B1, B2, and B6, all 3 of these vitamins have been, there are studies who have told us about the beneficial effects of these as far as the symptomatology of PMS is concerned. Excuse me. So there are other studies that are telling us that magnesium is usually deficient in women who are suffering from PMS, and thereby magnesium supplementation can also help us. And also low levels of vitamin B6 can be implied in the symptomatology of PMS, and thereby daily vitamin B6 supplementation might improve the symptoms. And ginkgo biloba, I already mentioned in the previous study that there might be some beneficial effects as far as these studies are showing us. And I already mentioned vitamin A, C, E, and other antioxidants that might be beneficial in treating the symptoms of PMS. So this abstract, we are talking about the various antioxidants. So this abstract showed that increased oxidative stress and reduced antioxidant capacity may occur in PMS women, and that when we supplement them with antioxidants, then probably the symptomatology will get reversed. So talking about the various herbs and all of that, this study, it was a huge study which concluded that so many herbs like that John Wort and ginkgo biloba and all of that, they had studied all of that, but this study has concluded that only calcium had good quality evidence to support its use in PMS, and they did not favor the use of the other herbal products. So as I already mentioned, calcium may play a big role, calcium deficiency that is, and also vitamin D. And there are many similarities between PMS symptoms and those of hypocalcemia, including depression, fatigue, and so many others. And studies suggest that blood calcium and vitamin D levels are lower in PMS women compared to the others, and thereby calcium supplementation may reduce the symptom severity. Also, I earlier also mentioned about non-heme iron. When we talk about iron, a study found that high intake of non-heme iron through supplements or plant sources was associated with a lower risk of PMS. Interestingly, this benefit wasn't found with the heme form of iron. So there are studies about this, and the level of iron intake, like normally we say 18 to 20 milligrams per day, but it has been found in women suffering from PMS, if they are given higher doses than 20 milligrams per day, then the beneficial effect is much more compared to the lower doses. So the normal RDA, whatever, if it's up to 18, it will be more in women who are suffering from PMS, and that too the non-heme iron form. So if I want to conclude my remarks about the nutraceuticals that we use for PMS, evening primrose oil, ginkgo biloba, magnesium, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B1, B2, B6, iron, vitamin C, E, all of these may have a role in the management of PMS, where lifestyle modification alone is not of much benefit, and they form the mainstay of the second line of management. The first line, as I mentioned, is lifestyle modification and dietary changes. And then on the second line, we come to the nutraceuticals, which I just spoke about in detail. And now we are going to talk about the CBT. Cognitive behavioral therapy is also comes in the second line of management.
Dr. Queen, you have another 2 minutes, that's all.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. In CBT, the woman's cultural perception of PMS and negative menstrual attitudes are changed. And here, it has been found to be at least as effective as antidepressant treatment and has a longer lasting effect without too many side effects. That is why CBT will be better than the antidepressants. Okay. Now coming to the SSRIs, that is, we all know about the SSRIs. The Cochrane data till 2013 is showing that they were usually taken for about 2 weeks before the start of the menstrual period, or every day, that is 2 weeks, the luteal phase compared to the continuous, and both regimes had good effects, but the adverse effects were nausea and asthenia. And other Cochrane reviews are also talking about the adverse effects being asthenia and nausea, but they had good effects as far as the symptomatology of PMS was concerned. And another study also is talking about SSRIs. Now, hormonal modes of therapy, long-acting GnRH analog can be used, but will definitely need add-back therapy. LNG IUCD has also been used. Estrogen therapy as a transdermal patch or subcutaneous implant, and OCPs containing drospirenone can also be used. But it has been found that the 4-day pill-free formulation acts better than the 7-day pill-free formulation. And danazol, though effective, has too many side effects, so it is not considered. And this study is also talking about the 4-day pill-free period in drospirenone OCPs compared to the 7-day pill-free period. So this is one of the modes of therapy. Now, diuretics has a questionable role. Spironolactone and pamabrom both either can be used. And surgical management, as I mentioned, is the last resort and preferably avoided. Oophorectomy is what is spoken about just to cause a menopause, and TLH or TH along with BSO. So just to summarize, PMS is a less understood entity which, however, adversely affects the quality of life of the affected woman. After the complaints suggestive of PMS are brought to us, a prospective diary is essential. That is the DRSP, which I in detail spoke about. Lifestyle modification plays a major role along with dietary changes, and this is the main mode of treatment. After that, the nutraceuticals, including GLA, B6, vitamin D, calcium, iron, all of these may also play an important role. That is the nutraceuticals, but that is only second line of management. CBT, which is also a second line of management, may be thought about. SSRIs may be thought about when the other ones are not effective. Hormonal treatment is also there, which is available in our armamentarium. We might have to think about them. But the most important thing is that we have to sympathetically support a woman who is suffering from PMS. Otherwise, her productivity and quality of life will really be very, very bad. And we have, being gynecologists, we have to help the women who really need our support. And I thank you all for your patient listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Queen Aditya. What an exhaustive review you have done. And your last slide has really summarized everything very beautifully. Everything is fallen in place.
Thank you, ma'am.
I appreciate, I also am going wiser from this particular time. I totally agree with you. When you say a patient PMS, the person doesn't like it. So you have very beautifully categorized that, PMS A means anxiety, PMS C means crazy, PMS D and PMS H. I think it's a better way of, putting a diagnosis in one particular place. You also highlighted beautifully what is the conventional, we said post-ovulatory thing, but the rest of the things you also highlighted when in a non-ovulatory patients and when the uterus is not working, how this particular thing can make a presentation. You very emphatically emphasize there is no role of investigations.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And the final treatment you have said, it is the non-pharmacological, X the best. Lifestyle modification, diet, exercise, and stress management. That's the key. But conventionally, we have been using pyridoxine, that is vitamin B6. We've been using primrose oil. I think, this is something like whether they work as a placebo or otherwise, they have been part of it. And I think, people are benefited out of it. Yes. I will only comment on two things. Sometimes a patient has a premenstrual headache. Sometimes the premenstrual dysmenorrhea is too much. In those particular patients, I find, mefenapenic acid 3 times a day works very well. Yes. Spironolactone has a place sometimes when the bloated feeling is too much, then she can have. When you find the mastalgia, now you have Armilon, but in those cases, even a bromocriptine for 10 days can be relief. And last resort is you have to use a hormonal treatment and SSRI. And in my own practice, I've never seen, that you have been so crazy to offer her oophorectomy or hysterectomy. I think, wonderful. On the behalf of everybody who's listening all across to you, thank you, Dr. Queen Aditya. And I repeat again, you have a great future.
Thank you, ma'am. Pranam, pranam.
Now when we call to the last presentation, we have very little time left with us, but Dr. Jyoti is going to be very brief, and her this presentation will be more wonderful than what she had done it in the first part of it. Over to Dr.